Hello again. I'm Joe Connolly of WCBS 880 News to introduce you to someone you hear on WCBS 880 News a lot, Kathy Wild of the Partnership for New York City. She and they are the leading voices of businesses in New York, and Kathy tells it like it is. Producer Neil Caruso will join us as well. First, Kathy, I want to ask you about your newest survey that says large businesses that many small and mid-sized businesses depend on think that the average office occupancy is going to be 56% for the foreseeable future. So I thought to myself, well, that looks like the employees won then the debate over working arrangements. Is that the case? Is that too strong? What do you think?
Well, I think that the desire of employees for flexibility in their schedule and the experience they've had during the COVID, where they had the option of not going into the office, not taking an hour commute. Um, I think that will have long-term consequences. What we're seeing now, 82% of employers are saying that their schedule for presence in the office is going to be a hybrid schedule with the average being 3 days a week. So that's a big change. I mean, prior to the pandemic, we're talking about maybe 6% of the employers allowing people to work remotely. From 6 to 82, big number.
That's a significant change, almost like the invention of the internet or something. That unforeseeable until it happened.
Yes, and what happened during the pandemic, within 2 weeks, most of our big firms switched from in office work to remote work because we had a lockdown, really very serious lockdown in New York City and across the country and the world. So there was no choice to do an immediate transition. So what happened was it was an industrial revolution. We went in the 70s, we had a dramatic experience of going from the old industrial economy to the service economy. Well, this is from the service economy to the digital economy. And instead of happening gradually over 1 or 2 decades, it happened instantaneously. And that's got huge impact. I mean, we have remote education, telemedicine, remote health. We've got remote work. Everything's, remote entertainment, remote cultural experiences. All of that has changed. And I don't think we know the implications yet. So when you ask Joe who won, I don't think we know.
What do you hear about how the small and mid sized businesses in the office districts are doing?
If you're talking about small and mid-sized businesses across the 5 boroughs and the suburbs of the city in residential communities, they're thriving. If you're talking about the businesses in Midtown and Lower Manhattan that depended on both office worker foot traffic, but also on tourists and on business travel, they're not doing well. And many have not come back. But citywide, we have in the last year a record number. We have 32,000 new businesses formed in New York City in the last year. So, but most of them, Manhattan's the only one that didn't have net growth in new businesses. Most of them are in Queens. Brooklyn is the number one. So we're seeing the city as a whole, its neighborhoods, its local business districts across the 5 boroughs, and our surrounding suburbs, the economy is pretty good.
That's also a huge industrial revolution type of a change, equally large.
Absolutely.
So we don't know yet is the answer to many of these questions, but what is the future of the Midtown Manhattan business environment?
I have uh, I have seen over the years ebbs and flows in terms of the city economy and what happens in various neighborhoods. Obviously, we went through in 2001 the crisis in the lower Manhattan business district where we lost, where we instantaneously lost 12 million square feet of office space and thousands of businesses were displaced. And Actually, it became the fastest growing, within 2 years, 3 years, it became the fastest growing neighborhood in the country, Lower Manhattan. It was a different community, a much better community as it was rebuilt, but big change. The same thing is now focused on what's happening in Midtown. And I have infinite confidence. I mean, Manhattan is an island. The value of Midtown properties is going to spring back. And it's not going to be exactly the same as it was pre-pandemic. We're going to see more residential. I think we know that. And that's a good thing. It'll make the streets safer on a 24/7 basis. It'll bring back business to local customers to local business. So I think it's not a negative. Um, I've described that I think we have to, in New York, we often have a cycle of blight before we have a resurgence. We've seen that, over the years. So I predict we're going to have a resurgence. The question now is how quickly that comes. And that depends on the support and the tools we get. We got great support during the COVID from the federal government. Hopefully that will continue so that we can get the infrastructure in place, improvements in the public realm that are needed to make people feel comfortable coming back to the city. Big investment that's been made already and needs to continue in making people feel safer, particularly on the subways and in the transit hubs. Big investment in dealing with the mental illness and homelessness problems that have concentrated in Midtown during the time that nobody was around. So a lot of problems shifted to that area and became much more visible, have to be fixed. All of those are big challenges, but I think we've got the right agenda. The mayor and the governor, fortunately, are in agreement on that agenda and are pushing together. The business community is doing all we can to support them. So I'm very optimistic.
Good. Neil.
Yeah, Joe and Kathy, good to see you again. You mentioned a lot of new businesses forming outside of Manhattan. I'm curious, what are the industries you see as the most sustainable in this post-pandemic world?
Well, certainly the housing industry, conversion of buildings, the real estate board of the city put out a report. They found 20 million square feet of older, smaller commercial buildings that are appropriate for conversion to residential. So I think that is one key area. Obviously, the tech sector has, which is everything's become tech, but the tech sector has grown substantially. Venture capital investment in tech companies, down a little bit last year, but otherwise has been thriving. Investment in the life sciences area has really grown during the pandemic. And New York, because of our great universities and research capacity, is very strong in sort of the cutting edge of innovation. And a lot of activity has shifted from the West Coast to the East Coast between New York and Boston. Tech entrepreneurs in the city 5 years ago would say, well, we have to open in California because that's where the talent is. That's not true anymore. There's nobody you talk to that doesn't say, I have no trouble getting talent in New York City, except for one thing, and that is the cost of housing. So we've got to deal with that issue. But if we can solve the affordable housing issue, we're going to have more talent than we can put to work.
And what do you make of the labor market right now, Kathy? Because we are seeing layoffs in the tech sector. Maybe that's has to deal with inflation and those issues. But what do you make of the overall labor market in the city?
We still have almost 200,000 job openings in New York City for looking for talent to fill them, for qualified people to fill them. So I think this is a number of companies, because of the nature of the explosion of activity for a number of the tech companies, the big tech companies, whether it was e-commerce companies and or many of the other companies that we know as the big tech companies, they hired for that period. And now as people come back to the in-person world as opposed to the virtual world, they may be overstaffed in a lot of areas. So I think this is a transition. Long term, our growth in jobs is going to be in the tech sector.
And just to wrap up, we appreciate your thoughts and observations, Kathy, as always. Does the 82% hybrid work finding mean that we're never going to be free of Zoom? I mean, Zoom is with us, or what's your reading on the Zoom economy, Kathy?
I don't think that Zoom builds relationships. And I find when I meet somebody that I've done a bunch of Zooms with, I may or may not recognize them. And I certainly know nothing about their personal life, or we haven't bonded. You don't bond on Zoom. So I believe that in person is coming back, but the tools that we've developed, like the Zoom, the tools we've developed during this period, during this transition, are going to be available to us. And that's going to be great. It's helpful. We can fit more into our day when we can do Zoom instead of running to Midtown. I'm in Lower Manhattan, running to Midtown for a meeting. So I can do 3 meetings where I could only do 1 before. So we just have to learn how to use that tool in a way that doesn't interfere with building relationships and with the kind of mentoring and support and development that particularly young people need in their careers.
Right. We can use Zoom to get more into our day as long as we don't use it all day, every day.
Exactly.
Kathy, it's always interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you both. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Neil.